recognizing the House Leader of the third party.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to my colleague from Abbotsford for ceding the floor. A few questions here. I got about half an hour with the Minister, and I look forward to this opportunity. Just wondering if the Minister can provide an update with respect to the use of First Nations Indigenous names. This is an issue that I've been raising for the last 3 years now in estimates. I've been assured that there's been a lot of work happening, but yet we continue to have a situation where Indigenous people's names can't be reflected on their government identification.
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank the member for the question. We've had some really good conversations over the past couple of years, and I know how important it is to the member that our commitment on the Declaration Action Plan, Action 315, to adopt the inclusive font that enables the use of Indigenous languages across government systems, like driver's license and birth certificates, is vitally important for communities, and I very much understand that. We recognize and acknowledge how much denying Indigenous peoples their name is part of that colonial system here in Canada. It's a legacy that Indigenous people are still living with today that needs to be fixed, and that we need to do that work to fix these things like birth certificates and driver's licenses and business licenses. We've talked over a couple of years about the significant technical and policy and legislative changes that need to go on alongside this and have that coordinated effort of changes, because the scale of this is significant. This is not an easy fix, as we've discussed over years. These integrated systems and the scale of change that's required not only here in British Columbia but across Canada is enormous. But we know that accommodating the Indigenous names in one system, it can put potential risk to that individual from cutting them off from other crucial services, as we've discussed over the years. And so we want to proceed very carefully to ensure that we are not causing more harm as we look forward, moving on solutions. There's been some really good work done over this past year since we've last talked about mapping the service dependencies and where it all starts, starting from a birth certificate, and then what is all interconnected to the birth certificate, and moving forward, the myriad of systems that then that birth certificate then registers next in life, access to education systems, access to healthcare, all these different things. And that enormous mapping of service dependencies had to happen for us to understand not only where the most significant harms are and where the areas of focus that we need to have first are. So that work has been done. We've done that in consultation with First Nations people. We're working with the First Peoples Cultural Council as we're doing things like integrating the keyboards into our systems on those things that can be adaptable, that aren't critical on multiple jurisdictions. So we want to ensure that we have that inclusive font in a way that works for everyone. What we don't want is to have access denied at, say, a federal level to systems that are required and needed through changes that can potentially harm here. So we want to make sure that we're working with Indigenous people to not only map it and figure out where we need to focus first, and which we are doing, and then to continue that work. I expect within this coming year that there'll be certain records that are going to be accessible for Indigenous people in those in the language of choice, and to be done in collaboration with a number of other ministries, as the member knows, but also we need to have these conversations and continue them because we are having them across federal, provincial, and territorial partners. So in January. In January, we had a federal, provincial, territorial meeting here in British Columbia that we hosted that focused on digital identity and cybersecurity. And the main focus on the digital identity piece was the shared conversation across all provinces on the scope of reflecting Indigenous languages on these key core documents that then need to be that need to connect with other services, being interprovincial or with the federal government. So that work is being done with my colleagues. We're meeting again in September to continue on that work. We're doing great learnings amongst each other on where each of us are and how far along this process we are. And, BC is really doing some extraordinary work in that mapping piece that we've done, so we can actually, continue the work in a thoughtful way, in partnership with First Nations, to ensure that those those documents that are causing the most harm are addressed first, and how we're going to address them.
Member.
I recognize that the minister is likely not intending any offense. However, I think it's important to acknowledge that we've had instances where a mother wants to name her newborn child, has laid out what that name is. It's an important name in the family, and an English alphabet option was provided. So is it the alphabet that is the problem? Is it the characters that the government can't handle? Because it's not necessarily the name, it's how it's spelled. I have on my government issue computer the keyboard. Tech loaded it up. I have it. It's accessible. I can write documents in Senchothan. When I speak Senchothan in the legislature, Hansard, if I say the word Shteitnu right now, 20 minutes later, Hansard has it written down on the record for everybody to see. You'll see it, and they'll get it right. And you know what happens when they don't get it right? They give me a call, or they call up someone in my office and they say, "Hey, what did he say? What did the member say?" And then we sort it out. Actually, I think I owe Hansard one right now, but not this one, but another one. I think the point that I'm trying to make is that we've made a commitment to self-determination, and what Indigenous people are hearing from this government is, and this is where I find the government suggesting that the work that it's done being extraordinary doesn't match. We can't name our children meaningful names. We're not allowed to do that under the current system. I can't name my child Tsahana, a name that has been carried by my uncles, my great uncles, and my family since time immemorial. I cannot do that. This institution will not allow that to happen. I will get STHENEP handed back to me, but that is not how it is pronounced properly. And the anglicized version of these names is not how the name is pronounced, and that is the reason why these parents are asking and demanding for their children to be named with the correct alphabet, so that then, and I was just talking to my colleague here about how challenging it is for us all to be able to read those names, and me too. But once you unlock it, once you understand, then you're able to say the name properly. And saying the name properly is important, because there are differences between different names, just very basic nuances between them. But currently, right now, for 3 years, we have been promised we'll get there. And what it feels like is that this is not a priority. It feels like there is a lack of desire to get this done. This is the third year in a row that I've raised this issue. Earlier today, they moved second reading of the bill to remove gender identifiers. We celebrated inclusivity. We celebrated diversity, except when it comes to Indigenous people being able to name their children culturally appropriate, and in fact, the names that they belong to. When are we going to see the ability for a child to be born in this province and have their appropriate name be reflected on their birth certificate?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to say to the member that I completely agree with absolutely everything he said, except for it not being a priority, because it is absolutely a priority. We've committed to it. I've committed to it. I know the member will be asking these questions to the Minister of Health, and he is committed to it. It is absolutely a priority. But I 100% agree that this needs to happen, and it should happen. We know how important this is for families who want the ability to name their children in the language of their choice. Absolutely. There is 100% agreement with everyone in this House that this needs to happen. So the member and I, over the couple of years, have talked. It is amazing that Hansard, in 20 minutes has that name up. This is an independent system that doesn't talk to other systems within government and doesn't talk to, the federal government and have to coordinate programs. There's three things when we're taking a look at alphabets, if you will. We've got the font, the keyboard, and the database. And the first two are easier. The font and the keyboard, you can make those fixes. You can send your email in the language of your choice. It's the databases that are, that don't accept those diacritical markers, as they're called. And it's that interconnectedness between, our provincial programs that work together, the birth certificate that then you need to use to register for your, health, your health care that you need to register for education. It's those those diacritical markers that aren't interoperable with those fonts and that keyboard. And so we are doing that work. That work is happening. It's ongoing. And, as I said before, I think we're going to see in this year, I expect some of these key documents to be available for people to name their children in the language of their choice. Of course, the member is going to have a lot more of these questions for health. I'm the business and registry side, and so, I know the member is going to go deeper into this when he gets the Minister of Health in front of him. But, there are areas where it's simple, like this Hansard example, and then there's areas where we have interjurisdictional connections with databases that connect, and we want to make sure that we're not cutting people off from services that they require. They absolutely need to ensure that those critical services that people require are there for them when they need it. And so, as we've said, mapping out, what needs to happen first and where the potential harms are in each of those documents, and then we can proceed in that thoughtful manner so that we're not cutting off people or denying people accidentally the services that they need. And so, while I 100% understand the member's frustration, because this is a long journey. This is decolonizing and dismantling 20-year-old systems, that were designed to keep, those names not usable, for families. And so, doing that work, which we've committed to in the action plan, which I personally have committed to the member through you, Chair, to, I know the Minister of Health has committed to this. We are doing this work. And I believe when we have this conversation next year, it's going to be a different conversation. But this year, getting to the places we've done in working with First Nations, in doing those critical services mapping, in all, mapping out all the services that are required off each specific document, like that big work, that heavy lifting that's being done, we're going to keep going, and we're going to keep working till we get this and we get it right, so that people who have the right to name their children in the language that they wish will be able to do it.
Member.
Thank you. And I'm sincerely hoping that we don't. I was hoping this year that this was not going to be a conversation, and I'm hoping next year that this isn't a conversation. I'm hoping that I'm not still here 5 years from now asking these questions, because it's one thing that time passes in this place very quickly, but this is the third year, and each time there's yet another group of children that have been kept from the names that they belong to, and I can walk across Blanchard Street. I can walk across Douglas Street. We can go through this city, and we can understand what the meaning of a name is. It is not a small. I recognize that the minister's saying that it's not a small change, but it's not a small thing that every single place around here is named after those colonial markers. Everywhere we go, we can easily see the wrong place names for those. And it's about how people can take ownership of places. It's about how people can take ownership of where they belong to. And currently, right now, in an official capacity, Indigenous people are not able to properly belong to the places that they can't achieve that in a way that Blanchard could or Douglas could. And I hope that next year we're not having this conversation again. I know that we're pushing up against the clock here. I do want to ask, because I was on Pender Island last week, and we were talking about the Connected Coast program. And there's a specific question about the maps, and the minister and I, again, this is another one of those kind of legacy conversations that we have every year in estimates, as the Connected Coast project is doing a great job of bringing rural and coastal communities online with fiber broadband. It's a wonderful program. And I think going back at the beginning of the program, it was which communities are not connected in any way. Let's get those connected. I'll use the example of Piers Island. It was left out. Piers raised their hands and said, it's left out. I sent the minister an email. I said, hey, what's going on with Piers? I don't know, we'll look into it. Now it appears that the group has figured out a way to get Piers. So that is the spirit of what this program and this project is, and it has progressed. I think in stark contrast to what we were just talking about, it is a project within this ministry that has progressed very quickly, and is evolving. One of the challenges with Pender and Maine and maybe Galliano is that there are services that exist there, and I recognize that there were some services that exist by a certain provider where the claim of the speed of the service is one thing, and the reality is something completely different. And specifically on Pender, and I think on Maine, the current provider, and I'm not going to get into naming names, and there's lots of providers out there, but there is a provider that is making a claim that their service is the Cadillac version, when I think it's I'm naming names now. What's the opposite of the Cadillac? Anybody want to help? The Pinto version. Pinto. Yeah, the Pinto version. The Pinto. I think everyone would want a Pinto right now. Anyway, the idea is that basically the claim that the service is as fast, it's a high-speed broadband service, and the actual delivery, getting Netflix or getting access to your Zoom meeting sometimes is almost impossible. How are we reconciling the speeds that are being claimed, and this is all about market share? These are private companies that are looking to be able to get access and there's a lot of public money being expended here. How do we ensure that my constituents on Pender, who are being told they're getting a service that they don't believe that they're getting, can make sure that they're not missing out on what would be a true fiber broadband service in their community?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. It's actually a really simple answer for the member, which is nice. So the Connected Coast is that foundational project. Pender Island has that last mile. When Connected Coast lands to Pender Island, it will be able to take the existing infrastructure and tap into the new Connected Coast infrastructure, increasing services.
House Leader of the third party?
I'm just thinking, is that it?
No, we're good.
Okay,
House Leader of the third party.
thank you. I just wanted to make sure that that was the full answer. So I appreciate that. That's what I actually had assumed was the case, was that that actually this might make it easier for those communities in the sense that, yeah, that's right. I just think the challenge that has been brought to my constituents and then through my constituents to me is that there is an assumption or there's a belief that Connected Coast won't be involved in on these particular islands because there's already a service provider there, and on the map it looks like it's already serviced. So can I just confirm we're landing fiber on in all of these communities, even though there is already a serviced kind of designation for it?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. So any projects that have provincial funding in them are what I called open builds, open access. And so anyone who wants to connect into that needs to work with the provider and be able to get access into it. So multiple service providers can have access. It's not just a lone service provider. So while there's multiple providers across the different islands, they're all going to be able to increase their capacity by tapping into that core Connected Coast infrastructure that's going to be coming around. Not every single island is going to have a landing site, but we'll still be able to tap into the landing sites that there are, or and get access to that increased capacity because there's already chosen landing sites that are going, but through those landing sites that taps into the last mile, you're able to connect. And once that's done, once Connected Coast is fully operational on the islands, all those last mile projects with existing infrastructure that's already there have tapped in. If there's underserved households, once that happens, and we can see that, we have the program to be able to go in and address it.
Member.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and nice to see you here. And thank you to the Minister for the responses. I have to head downstairs and do some work somewhere else, but just want to thank you for that. And I think all of our constituents on the Southern Gulf Islands will be very happy to be able to stream us live in broadband. Right?
For sure.
Thank you.
For sure.